Welcome to Tales from a Retro Gamer, episode number 16. Now, if you follow YouTube a lot and you're a gamer, you've probably seen several videos of people selling their collections, their retro games, getting rid of them. Maybe it's time to sell, that kind of thing. Well, I'm here to talk about not selling your retro games. Don't sell your retro games, or at least I'm going to tell you why I'm not selling mine. Now, before I get into that, this is not a shaming video. If there's some reason you need to sell your games, by all means do so. So some examples would include if you have an emergency, if you've got to pay the rent, if your car broke down, if a family member needs surgery, and if you have to have quick cash, by all means, selling your rare games, selling all of your games is a good way to raise some fast money. You can post them on Facebook or eBay or whatever, sell them to your local game shop. You'll get a little less money that way. But whatever the case, I'm not here to tell you not to do that. I mean, obviously, real life gets in the way of fun sometimes. Absolutely, sell your games if you have to. Another reason you might want to pare down a little bit if you're moving. You might be moving into a smaller space. Now, on an even more serious note, if video games have become a problem, like you're just absolutely obsessed with them, and it seems like maybe I'm obsessed with them, but I've got a lot of other interests in my life. I have a lot of family time. I spend a lot of time outdoors, playing sports and doing all that kind of stuff. But if video games have become a problem, like you just find like if they're interfering with your work or your relationships, by all means, if maybe it's like an alcoholic and you just need to cut it off and just get rid of them entirely, go cold turkey, totally understand that. I'm not talking about that. So there are a few reasons to get rid of your games. A couple more things. If you only see video games as sort of an investment, and the reason you've been buying them up is because you want to sell, and you think maybe the market conditions are right, and you want to sell, like some of the more expensive games have kind of leveled off, and some of the more popular expensive games that you hear about a lot for like the NES, maybe you want to sell. Maybe you think it's time to sell. That's fine. One more thing. If you're looking to fund a passion project, something that really means a lot to your life, by all means, sell your games. For example, the Game Chasers are working on a movie, and Billy and Jay have both done videos talking about selling their games to fund this project. By all means. So let's get to the meat of the episode where I tell you why you shouldn't sell your games, or actually why I'm not selling my games. Okay, so for starters, I'm a big fan of physical media. I like being surrounded by VHS tapes, DVDs, video games, records. I love all that kind of stuff. To me, it makes a house or apartment more warm. It's just more warm and inviting to have physical media. I love the box art, to look at the covers. I like the physical act of plugging in games, putting a record on the turntable, and that kind of thing. So for that reason, keeping my physical media, it's easier just to play downloads because it's already there, and you can just turn on your PlayStation 4, play whatever, games that are emulated, downloaded, whatever. Personally, I prefer physical media. I prefer, the old, just playing my old game systems. I like the original consoles. For example, I like plugging a cartridge into the Atari 2600 and using paddle controllers like these. There's really not a modern equivalent of the Atari 2600 paddle controller to play something like Warlords. Great 4-player game, and you just can't repeat that fully on like a modern system with maybe it downloaded and just using regular modern controllers. You just can't repeat that. That's the best way to play these old games for the 2600, like Video Olympics, which has Pong variations and all that kind of stuff. Got to have the paddle controllers. So the bottom line for that, I like playing the older games on the original hardware. There's just nothing like it. Like maybe you have an Atari 5200 with the trackball. Can't really repeat that on a modern console. Another reason I don't want to sell my retro games, and that I recommend that you not, they're fun to have around to maybe show your kids or your nieces and nephews or your grandkids. It's just cool to show them. You've seen those reaction videos on YouTube where like a modern kid, plays an Atari or listens to Black Sabbath or, does something old school like that, and just the reaction is fun. And you also use it as a learning tool. Well, this is a ColecoVision. This is what I had when I got for Christmas in 1982. This is the controllers we used. This is the games we played. It's just fun to watch their reactions. And like I said, it's just kind of a fun educational tool, just to see the differences between gaming now and gaming 40 years ago. So I like that. That's a lot of fun. Now earlier I mentioned relationships. If a video game is interfering with your life, with your real life, if it's causing problem with your relationships. Now there's a flip side of that coin. It could be possible where you're involved in a relationship with someone who's constantly ragging you about your games, your gaming. Now, whether that's your fault or their fault, you'll have to investigate that. Maybe counseling might be a good idea. But if you're with someone who constantly rags you about buying games, you have to hide your purchases. There's conflict over the time you spend. That's just something to examine. So that may be a reason to sell or not to sell. Just a heads up. Maybe it's time to trade in your significant other for a gamer. Who knows? Anyway, I would never recommend anybody getting a divorce over this. I would prefer that you guys seek counseling. Anyway, just a little relationship advice here from someone who probably shouldn't be giving it. Now, my main reason I want to keep my retro games, obviously, is I still love to play them. 8 times out of 10, when I go into my game room, I'll be playing my ColecoVision, Atari, and television, PS1 or Super Nintendo or Genesis, something like that, to play the older games. Now, my son has a PlayStation 4 I like to play. We have a Switch, we have an Xbox 360. I love playing those systems, but typically, like I said, about 80% of the time, I'll play the older games. They're just simpler, and I really enjoy them. And I've got a lot of memories associated with the games in my collection, and I'm going to show you a few of those. Back sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, a friend of mine named Russ, he gave me his entire 5200 collection, his entire Atari 5200 collection. He gave me the console, the trackball, the controllers, and about 15 games, including Robotron 2084. Now, if you're playing Robotron just on maybe emulated, you might not get the full experience. Robotron 2084 for the Atari 5200, see the thick box, it comes packaged with a dual controller holder, so you can have dual joystick control like the original arcade game. So once again, I like playing games on the modern hardware. Another cool game in my collection. Now, I'm not much into imports, but I'm a huge Flash fan, the superhero, the Flash. And I imported one game, Flash, for the Sega Master System because it wasn't available in the US, and I collect Flash stuff, and I really like that. That's really cool. The only way to get it was to import it, and I got that off eBay. It wasn't that expensive. I got it years ago for about 20 bucks, so very well worth it. Love that in my collection. At a show one time, I picked up a factory-sealed Tron Deadly discs for the Intellivision, and I've got the open cart, so I'm just going to keep this sealed as sort of a museum piece. Tron's one of my favorite movies. I love Tron Deadly discs, big Intellivision fan, so I'm definitely keeping that for my video game museum, mini museum. Now, back in the early 80s, I remember playing a game called Star Castle. Super fun, but it was very difficult, so I could only play it every once in a while because, if you guys know, I didn't have a ton of money going to the arcades. Star Castle wouldn't last me very, I could play it just for maybe a minute or so. I wasn't very good at it. So it was awesome when it came out for the Vectrex at home. And on my Vectrex, I can play Star Castle all I want, no quarters necessary, no hunting down an arcade, no downloading, no emulating. And on the Vectrex, you get vector graphics, which are very arcade-like. So got to have Star Castle for the Vectrex. Very, very cool. And so now, ColecoVision. You guys know I love the ColecoVision. Got one for Christmas in '82. It was the first console I actually owned. And in '84, when the console was basically canceled from the market, no longer available, Coleco, just stopped producing ColecoVision systems. There were stopped being games made for the system. I thought that was it for the ColecoVision. I thought there would be a set number of games. That was it. No more ColecoVision. But years later, in the modern era, obviously there are lots of small companies, independent companies, people in their garages, little companies making independent video games called homebrews. Now, it's so cool. I remember back in Showbiz Pizza, Chuck E. Cheese, someplace like that, playing Pac-Man. Now, Pac-Man was a platform game, climbing game that was kind of hard to figure out, so I never really got good at it. And I just didn't, I would watch people play, but I didn't spend a lot of money on it because I just couldn't quite figure it out. So it's very cool that in the modern era, there are companies making games for old systems. Modern companies making games for old systems. That's something that never would have occurred to me in the mid to late 80s. Who would have thought that, at that point, retro games were sort of considered junk. You know, when a new console would come along, people would get rid of their old stuff. So who would have ever thought that, you know, modern companies would make new games for old systems? That's awesome. Love the homebrew scene. That's one reason I like to, you know, keep my games. One other thing, I like media tie-in stuff. Sometimes the games aren't great, but in this case, this is actually a pretty good game. Midnight Mutants for the Atari 7800. You gotta love the Grandpa Munster art. And speaking of media tie-ins, I like to collect games for some of my favorite movies and characters, like Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back for the Atari 2600. That's a great shooter, very intense, it's a lot of fun, and I love having a boxed copy. Very nice. Now, one of my favorite all-time movies is Flash Gordon, the 1980 version. Obviously, it's kind of cheesy and campy, but it's super colorful, super fun, and just a huge fun adventure. I love having the game. The game is okay, but you gotta love that box art for the Atari 2600. Really cool to have that in my collection. Superman was a groundbreaking game for the Atari 2600. In 1978 it came out. It was one of the early games. I believe it was 78, maybe it was 80. 79, 80, something like that. Anyway, Superman for the 2600. I love the beautiful comic book art, and it came out to capitalize on the Superman movies. And I just love having the game. It's kind of dated, but it was revolutionary for its time with the different scenarios, the multiple screens, the adventure storyline. But it's just, as a comic book collector as well, I like having that game in my collection. And one of my favorite movies of all time is the 1933 King Kong, and I'm a big fan of Donkey Kong as well. So now King Kong is not the greatest game for the 2600, but it is pretty fun. It's a ladder climbing game, and if you like Donkey Kong, you'll probably get a kick out of King Kong. And once again, I love having the box with the art and everything. So these are just a few of the reasons I'm gonna keep my retro games, my vintage video games. They may go down in price over time. I don't really care. I just like owning them. And if I did get rid of my entire collection, it would be very difficult to put it together again someday. Regardless of how much they cost. I just like having them around, so I plan on keeping them for the foreseeable future. One more thing, I like video game collectibles as well, like this Pac-Man lunchbox. Now, when I was going to school, my parents didn't splurge a lot on things like lunchboxes and just extraneous stuff. So I had sack lunches, or I remember having a blue generic lunchbox, so they wouldn't really buy us like themed licensed lunchboxes. So now I can sort of have that, you know, in my old age. It's kind of cool to have a Pac-Man lunchbox. So I like video game collectibles as well. Anyway, whether you sell your retro games or not, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And comment below, have you sold anything that you regret getting rid of? Have you sold your entire collection? Have you sold a single game that was maybe worth a lot that you would really like to get back? If you have any regrets over selling anything in your collection, comment below. Speaking of comments, last week I did an episode on, my wife joined me for the episode, 2-Player Marriage Mayhem. Now that was a really fun episode where we talked about how gaming had caused some conflict early in our marriage, and I did have some cool comments on that episode. Yami Agni says, Perfect Dark really brought out some great competition with my father and sister. My question was there a particular game that maybe brought out conflict or that caused you guys to fight, or just brought, particularly heated matches or anything like that? Nintendo Arcade says, I'm not sure if you remember a game called Wizard of War. I do indeed remember that game. Awesome 2-player contest. But that game, me and my brother played for hours, up all night trying to beat each other, and then we realized you could work together, and it opened up a whole new way of playing. Love that game so much. Awesome. It's really cool when you can cooperate on the game instead of just compete. I love that as well. Eric Plunk says, not long after my wife and I started dating in 2003, I would bring my Xbox over and we'd play Lord of the Rings, Return of the King for hours. There was lots of yelling and getting mad over who got health pickups or if one of us wasn't doing well. It was definitely an early test of our patience and our relationship, and we're still together 16 years later, so it all worked out. See, the family that games together stays together. So there you go. Thanks for those comments. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you could like it, I would very much appreciate it. If you want to share it on social media, that would even be better. Click on that subscribe button below the video. That would be great. Thank you so much. Peace out. Click that subscribe button. Click that subscribe button.
Oh my gosh.